as we gather here tonight in this church. We know that Christmas this year is unlike any other Christmas we've celebrated before. To be in church at all feels like something of an achievement, given all the restrictions that have been placed on our activities due to the continuing spread of COVID-19. So there's no getting away from the fact that this year, things are bound to feel more disrupted, more provisional, and yes, more subdued than we would like or feel they ought to be. But this is where we are, living through an historic moment, but one most of us are living through rather quietly, with more than a little weariness and quite a lot of uncertainty about what the future holds. While I don't think for a moment any of us would suggest these are circumstances to wish for, they do nonetheless bring with them a valuable reminder. A reminder that very often it's in these quieter and weaker moments that those signs of hope and redemption we yearn for are in fact to be discerned. This is the flicker of light we only notice when enveloped by real darkness, the touches of color we only really appreciate when the sky seems perpetually gray. And it was, of course, only in the poor and dirty silence of a Bethlehem staple 2,000 years ago that the muffled cries of a newborn baby rang out as a hymn across the universe. The people to whom Jesus was born all those years ago, they knew what it was to live through desolation. They were well versed in disappointment, seasoned by disillusion and heartbreak. And this had long been their story, a tiny people subject over and over again to invasion and occupation, everything they held most dear uprooted and defiled. Yet not so much despite, but because of all they had been through, they had learned to look and to listen for the signs of hope. When generations earlier their leaders had been carried off into exile and their holy city was laid waste, the people of Israel clung on to survival amidst the ruins of what they had once been. And it was at that low point, out of the stillness, out of the darkness, out of the dust, that something happened. Something happened. Good news arrived again at last. Renewal and restoration were coming again at last. God was making himself known again at last. So it was that the prophet could proclaim at last that the Lord has comforted his people, he has redeemed Jerusalem, and all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God. Though the stillness and the darkness and the dust might yet return someday, so too would the hope. That hope nourished and sustained by the very things that seemed destined to destroy it. I'm sure you're aware that a lot of people this year are going to spend Christmas alone, many of them for the first time. Maybe even that some of you here tonight had planned to be somewhere else, and those plans have had to be changed at the last minute. As someone who himself has spent Christmas alone in the past, I do know just how lonely and daunting a prospect this can seem. The last time I spent Christmas on my own was when I was a chaplain in Oxford. On the very day I was supposed to fly out to Boston to see my family, snowfall closed the airports and hundreds of flights were cancelled. By the afternoon of Christmas Eve, everyone in my college had gone home and the front gates had been firmly shut and bolted. And so in a place where there always seemed to be at least someone around, suddenly there was absolutely no one around. That is, except for me. Standing alone in the quadrangle in the fading afternoon light, I became aware of an eerie stillness and silence having descended all around me. My first impulse was to feel sad. Sad that I wasn't going to share Christmas with my nearest and dearest. Sad that with the exception of church on Christmas morning, I'd be spending the next few days entirely in my own company. And while I won't pretend that the feeling of regret disappeared, I also gradually began to recognize some of the unexpected gifts that accompanied that time alone. And not the least of these, of course, was the realization that I really wasn't alone after all. And that the silence, the stillness, even the darkness, had an important part to play in reminding me of this basic truth. In the great prologue of the Gospel of John, we hear that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. The people among whom Jesus was born knew what the darkness was, and they also knew what it was to hope for the light. But it's also true that some of them had such fixed ideas about what that light should look like or where they should find it, that they ended up missing the light when it was finally revealed among them. So John tells us that he was in the world and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But of course, what was true then can still be true today, not least when we think the only way to experience Christ at Christmas must be brightly and noisily and surrounded by other people. Indeed, it may even be that amidst the usual merriment, we miss the flicker of light in the darkness, the touch of color in the gray sky, the muffled cry heard only in the silence. It may be, too, that the circumstances of this present moment actually provide us with an opportunity to welcome Jesus into our midst in ways we haven't done before. And in doing that, we may in turn find our deepest longings are answered by God in ways we never imagined. For our God is a God who keeps his promises, a God who is here with us tonight, a God who will be with those who are alone tomorrow, a God who abides in the silence and in the solitude, every bit as much as he does in the sound and in the celebration. For this is the God who came and dwelt among us, in so doing promised that all who received him, who believed in his name, he would give power to become children of God.